I am Terrell Jermaine Starr, senior reporter with The Root, and I am here with 2020 presidential candidate and the current mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio. How's it going?
I feel good. Good to see you.
Let's go on to some national issues.
Okay.
You've called for the abolishment of ICE.
Yes.
How do we do that?
So sometimes an organization has gotten perverted and corrupted, and that's what's happened with ICE. ICE is a political wing of the Donald Trump election operation at this point. He declares there will be ICE raids to gin up his base, and ICE pretends to do raids, generally doesn't do a whole lot. A couple of times they've done some very serious ones. But it's all about creating fear and creating emotion and not about doing their job, which is supposed to be about creating a coherent approach to immigration that actually treats people like human beings. You know, for a long time in this country, we did not take this punitive approach to everyone who was an immigrant. And the country was a lot better off because we didn't have kids in cages and kids separated from families and people stoked with fear. We've got 11 or 12 million people who are here already, who are part of our communities. They're not going anywhere. At one point, Trump talked about deporting everyone. That's never in a million years going to happen. It would destroy the American economy. It's inhumane. It's wrong. Let's just acknowledge the American reality. I talked about this in the first debate. I said there's an agenda here, a right-wing agenda to convince American citizens that immigrants cause their misery. Working class people, middle class people who feel stuck, who feel the American dream's not working for them. And what Trump and the right wing has done is say the immigrants did it to you. And I say very bluntly, the immigrants couldn't possibly have done that to you. They didn't have the power. The guy in the kitchen could not do that to you. The guy in the fields could not do that to you. Wall Street did that to you. The 1% did that to you. The big corporations did that to you. We've got to change that discussion entirely. There needs to be an honest conversation that is about class, which right now is only about race. It needs to be about class. And it needs to be about the reality of how working people are being turned against each other based on where they come from. But in truth, ICE is politicized, ICE is punitive, it's a fear-inducing entity. How about we say we're going to have border security, but we're also going to have a coherent approach to immigration. So what would that look like? A guest worker program, because we need a whole lot more people to come here and work. That's the truth, particularly in agriculture, for example. Comprehensive immigration reform, path to citizenship. Like, why don't we have the maturity as a country to say, guess what? 11 million people, 12 million people not going anywhere. Why don't we now deal with this?
Do you think it's because of the fact that Trump very effectively have tapped into a lot of people's racism and xenophobia about the Mexicans that are coming over who are murderers and rapists? I think, unfortunately, there are a lot of people whose votes you're trying to earn who genuinely feel that way. So how do you deal with somebody whose fears about non-white people have been tapped into so effectively where they vote for somebody like Trump who's openly racist and who feels that ICE is an essential part of not only the safety for America, but a safety measure to protect their whiteness?
I'm going to tell you what I think may be the truest thing that I can offer the American people when it comes to what's really happening here. Because I think this has been missed by a mile. Trump won not by bringing out a racist majority. I do not believe there's a racist majority in this country. I believe there's a core that unfortunately is racist for sure, and it's many millions of people. But if you look at just plain numbers, Trump won because a lot of Democrats stayed home. That's the number one fact. A lot of young people stayed home, progressives stayed home, people of color stayed home. A lot of people stayed home who, if they had come out, we're not even having this conversation. And he won because some people who had been voting Democrat before, including the famous Obama-Trump voter, migrated over. And I'm not saying that every Obama-Trump voter is necessarily someone who loves all races equally, but I surely believe a lot of those people are not racists. And I think the fact that Trump has consistently been give or take 40% in the polls, that says to me right away, a clear, strong majority of Americans are not buying his negativity and his racism. And we're ultimately a country that's becoming more progressive, more inclusive with every passing year. We got to stop assuming this is a lost battle. In fact, it's a battle we can win. There's more and more people every day. The new generation is coming up, which is inherently less racist than the generations before it. So this country is actually going in the right direction, where the president is trying to pull us in the wrong direction, who's unleashed the forces of white supremacy. They're not the majority, but they're powerful and negative and dangerous. But I also think there was a horrible mistake in 2016 of sending the message out inadvertently that folks who are angry about their economic circumstance or didn't like the status quo were somehow inherently racist. That's just not fair. There are a lot of people, white working class people, but also people of color who didn't like their circumstance and were sick of the status quo. That did not make them racist. That made them angry at a broken status quo driven by a 1%. We got to separate those pieces. And if we would talk about economics more and the commonality that all people, working people have, I think we would start to make more progress in this national discussion.
Let's move on to something that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said about the detention facilities, in which she described them as concentration camps. You disagreed with her wording. Can you explain why you did?
Yeah, I represent a lot of people, literally Holocaust survivors and children of Holocaust survivors. I mean, I remember vividly sitting at a dining room table in Brooklyn at a dinner one night, a Sabbath dinner, and a woman rolled up her sleeve and had the tattoo on her arm from Auschwitz. I mean, the real concentration camps and Nazism is something that we just cannot compare things that we're experiencing right now in America to that. I mean, that was systematic genocide. What's happening with family separation? Unquestionably, those kids are being put in prisons. There's no two ways about it. It's imprisonment. It's inhumane. It's wrong. It's against our values. But it cannot be compared to the concentration camps of Nazi Germany. I just don't believe that.
Right, and I think the reason why a lot of people would push back against it, because there's the assumption that a concentration camp is only germane to the Jewish experience. If you look at the history across the continent of Africa, for example, there were cases during colonialization where concentration camps did in fact take place.
Yeah.
And so I think with a lot of people, I think that's one of the reasons why they would just make a note of that when they describe the current situation that we're in right now.
Can I just say it? I think that's a very fair point. And I get why people say, well, wait a minute, our history is being missed here. Genocide, let's make it just blunt and clear. Concentration camps were part of a genocide. There has been genocide in other places in the world, to say the least. When the government is sponsoring the killing of people because of who they are, that's genocide, right? This is not that. This is a horrible, inhumane policy, what we have at the border, but it's not that. And that's why I make that differentiation.
Okay. Now, there's a white supremacist group, the Proud Boys. They were recorded here in New York City abusing and beating up people here in the city, and the NYPD was accused of not taking action against them while this was happening. There are some people who said NYPD was nearby, did not take action, and so as a mayor, can you tell us how you plan on addressing groups like the Proud Boys who may emerge every now and then, and how would you address this nationally?
So a number of those individuals were arrested and prosecuted. So first, on the pure facts, no, there were real consequences, and anyone who attempts anything violent in the city, particularly if it's racially motivated or hate motivated, we are very, very aggressive in our follow-up, and I want to show people that this stuff is not tolerated in this city. There was one situation where the police just weren't organized well, and it took time to identify the people before they were arrested. But no. They're very clear in this city. We do not accept hate crimes, and we make sure that people see the consequences of hate crimes.
Let's go on to some LGBTQ issues in the city and issues of sex work. So you said that sex work should not be decriminalized, or your particular wording was you're not comfortable with that. Can you explain why you're not comfortable with the decriminalization of sex work?
Yeah, I think we need change in the legal approach for sure. And I'm still studying, but the model that's most interesting to me is called by some the Nordic model, which does not penalize the sex worker, but still keeps penalties for pimps and johns. And my view is in a time when we see horrible sex trafficking and a lot of violence and a lot of intimidation and exploitation related to it, I don't feel comfortable at all decriminalizing those type of activities. I want to make sure the individual who is suffering is supported and addressed, but not those who create the suffering getting off without consequences. So I think there's ways to change our laws for sure, And that's something I want to figure out the best model for, but full decriminalization I think would be a mistake.
I think what a lot of sex worker advocates, how they would respond to it is that what is the benefit of holding the potential for criminalization, for somebody who chooses to sell who chooses to sell their body as a matter of commerce, for work, and that there's a difference between sex work and trafficking.
Correct.
And John's, right? And so when people would hear your statement, they would say that you're not distinguishing the difference between the two.
Well, I'm saying maybe that I'm starting with the concern for safety first and stopping exploitation because it's happening on a vast scale. So, you might argue there's a way to separate those ideas legally, and again, this Nordic model to some extent does that. But what I would not want is an approach that ignores this horrible and rather pervasive reality of trafficking and exploitation. If that cannot be addressed, I think there's a tremendous danger that more and more people, young people, particularly young women, would be exploited. So I start from a safety first worldview. This is another reality of being a chief executive, that you think what's going to make sure people are safe. And if we took away all restrictions, I think a lot of particularly young women would be in danger.
But would you be open if you could be presented a way where decriminalization could take place and the exploitation, which is your concern, would not take place? Would you be open to looking at plans that
Very high bar, meaning I would have to believe that there were tremendous barriers in place to stop exploitation. Because right now trafficking is epidemic. I mean, it's much bigger than we ever realized, right? And it's international. And we see so many young people afflicted. We see a lot of LGBT youth in our communities taken advantage of, come here particularly from other places, or are kicked out by their parents. I mean, there's a whole lot of this going on. So in theory, I would listen to any proposal, but I want to tell you the bar would be high to make sure it really does stop this kind of exploitation.
So across the nation, Black trans women have been murdered at alarming rates. And I'm just curious, as the mayor of New York City, who's dealt with some of these issues over the years, and then also somebody who wants to be president, how would you, as a chief executive of America, deal with the issue of transgender murders?
I think it starts at the core of the issue, which is showing respect for trans people. And first of all, reversing what Trump did with the military, for example. Of course, we want trans people, we want anyone ready to serve their country to be honored and respected. By the way, we have to go back and make up for the sin of what happened with tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of folks who served and did not get the discharge they deserved because they were from the LGBT community and still don't get their full benefits as veterans. So there's still big changes to make just to make up for the past. But we start by saying we're going to show respect for everyone. We've done that here. Trans people are fully protected by our human rights law. We've made clear that folks get to choose their own identity. That extends even back to being able to amend a birth certificate, obviously choose the bathroom that's appropriate for you. I think going to those root points of we're going to show people what a fair and just society looks like is part of how we end the negativity that's particularly affected trans women of color. So a chief executive who speaks up for people, speaks up for inclusion, makes all the difference in the world. And we need to do that in this country. And I think the American people are ready to be accepting, but they're being given the exact opposite message right now by President Trump.
Do you support reparations for Black people? And if you do, can you tell us what reparations for Black people in a de Blasio administration would look like?
Support a commission, and I support taking fundamental steps to address economic and racial injustice. And look, a commission should look at the whole picture and come back and talk about the ways we make things right. But in the meantime, I'm a believer that if we're going to change our society, it is based on sort of big strategic moves. Things like the economic empowerment of communities, and I mentioned the case of marijuana legalization. That is structural. That's not, I mean, some people I think have the idea of a reparations model might be, a check to people individually. I'm not prejudging, but I'm telling you that I think if we're actually going to change things, it's things like economic empowerment in a systematic fashion. It's things like early childhood education. that if it's not done systematically, we'll never reach people properly. We're a country right now that does not focus on early childhood education. That disproportionately hurts African American children. In this city, we made pre-K for all universal and free. We're doing the same thing for 3-year-olds. That model, we've seen it now in actual data, actual test results, is starting to close the achievement gap in a serious way for our young African American children. That's the kind of change we need for the whole country. So while we're sorting out what it means to reckon with our past, and we should do it openly and systematically, and that's why I like the commission approach, there's a lot we could be doing right now to get at how we change people's lives.
Ta-Nehisi Coates says there's nothing wrong with us getting a check.
I'm only saying that I think the commission should look at any and all ideas, but I don't believe we're going to change people's lives profoundly if we don't make systemic change.
Fair enough. So you're the mayor of New York City, and you have so much going on with yourself. What do you say to people who would argue that with everything going on here, why don't you stay in New York City and focus on that as opposed to trying to run for the biggest office in the land in pretty much the world?
Because we have fallen into a trap in this country where it's become convenient for folks who don't have a background running something and don't have big responsibilities and busy lives to be the people who run for president, right? So the model now, in fact, is if you have a free and open schedule, you can run for president, regardless of whether you've actually had to do the things that allow you to govern this country. What is the job in the end? President of the United States means you're governing the entire country, the entire federal government, setting the direction for the country, dealing with crises hour by hour, day by day. Look, could someone do that who had no experience doing it before? I guess so. There are some very talented people out there. But generally speaking, we as human beings do a lot better. We have to decide on a military strike, or how to deal with a disaster, or how to deal with some kind of tense situation between communities. We do better if we've actually dealt with it before. And I've dealt with it on the highest level. And I've shown that we can make change. And this is the entire rationale. I don't like the situation in this country. We are a country right now that is not serving working people. This is my message. The entire campaign has been working people first. That we're a country that has gone astray, that's serving the 1% almost exclusively in Washington, and working people are taking it on the chin, and it's gotten really dangerous and really divided, and it can't go on. And I'm able to show that we did big systematic changes here. In this big place, this diverse place, this tough place, we were able to change things. And I had to walk through that fire. I had to deal with those challenges. I had to deal with the opposition. That is the preparation for the presidency. So I would argue, if you really want to change things, having the experience to know how to do it is priceless. And I've got it, and that's what motivated me to come forward as a candidate.
Now, we ask every candidate this question.
I'm
and it's
ready.
your turn. Are you sure?
Mm-hmm.
So,
I'm excited for this question.
Okay, so why should black people vote for you?
Because we need a country that is fair, and it's not right now. We have profound structural racism and profound economic injustice, and the two go together. The level of inequality in this country is directly related to our history and to this growing reality of power and wealth concentrated in the hands of a very few. I've actually fought that effectively. I've taken that on and done something about it. I'm someone in my life's journey that I've had a profound, deep connection to people of African descent. My history in my own family has educated me deeply. You know, when I fell in love with Shirlane, we were actually both working in City Hall for Mayor Dinkins. And, you know, I literally had a love at first sight moment. And that was 28 years ago. And I've gone through a personal education, having a black family, having reality of my son, for example, living as a young black man in America, that gives me insights that are very different from the understanding I think a lot of other candidates bring. But that's not enough to have sensitivity or insight or connection. It's what you do with it. And I feel an urgency about change, and I've shown it. And I've had to stand up for communities of color many, many times against powerful entrenched interests. We talked about police unions earlier. Certainly, a whole lot of people who have power in this town, including business community, did not like when I was fighting for a $15 minimum wage that particularly helped communities of color. Didn't like we were standing up for the kinds of changes in policing. These things don't happen easily. So I think African Americans are very discerning about who's actually ever stood up for them and made a difference for them. And it's not theory in my case. You don't have to wonder. You can actually see the fights I've fought and seen what it's done to support the African American community here in the nation's largest city. There's no gray about it. I've been willing to stand up even when it was really, really tough. And you know what? That's the only way you change anything.
I have to ask you this final follow-up based on what you said. What's the number one thing you've learned as a white man being a part of a black family?
That it's a lot worse than we were told. That even growing up as I did, in a family that recognized the unfairness in our society, and hearing all the voices that, all the commentary, all the examples, only seeing it through a family prism taught me the depth of it, the magnitude, the fact that so many people are suffering just generation after generation, and how hard it is to break out of it. Until I got to know family members very personally and see their struggles, I don't think, even though I thought I understood the extent, I don't think I did. And the example I raised with my son is another one as well. I think I understood that families of color have to be worried about their young men, but it's very different when you have to be worried about your own son. And it all comes home. And you realize how pervasive it is and how upsetting. Because it's not just the unfairness. The unfairness is just, it's like a slap in the face. You do everything to bring your child up right, and then they could be judged as part of the problem when they're as good a child as they could possibly be. That's happening to millions and millions of Americans all the time. But the sense of vulnerability, too. I think if you're a white male, you deal with challenges. Everyone deals with challenges. There are a lot of working class white males in this country struggling to get by. But if you're a white male, you don't deal with a whole host of challenges. And to have it come home to my own household, to recognize the vulnerability that people feel all the time and how unacceptable it is, how un-American it is, it's just not something we can tolerate anymore. So for now, for me, it's not, I feel like I left a past behind where I felt a sense of security I didn't even know was part of the way we're all taught. And I don't feel that same security now. I feel a solidarity based on my own experience. And that just adds to my urgency for change. People should not have to live with that vulnerability, but they do all the time. We can't go on as a country that way. And I'm not going to stand for it.
Well, that's an excellent note to end on. We appreciate this. You took all your time. I know you have a city to run, but we're really grateful for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. A pleasure.
Yeah.